10 million years ago, before there were cities, before there was writing, before there was even a species called Homo sapiens, something was already getting drunk. Not a person, a primate. Somewhere in the forests of ancient Africa, one of our distant ancestors picked up a piece of fruit that had fallen from the tree days earlier. It had split open, wild yeast had gotten inside, and it had started quietly to ferment. This is the forgotten truth about alcohol. We didn't invent it. We inherited a taste for it. And the story of how that happened is a lot stranger and a lot older than most people realize. Here's the biology. When ripe fruit sits too long, wild yeast, which is everywhere in the air and on plant skins, starts breaking down its sugars. One of the byproducts of that process is ethanol, the same molecule in a glass of wine. In the wild, this happens constantly, which means for millions of years, any primate that ate fruit was occasionally eating alcohol in small diluted amounts, but real amounts nonetheless. A UC Berkeley biologist named Robert Dudley spent years studying this and built out something now called the drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument, the smell of ethanol wasn't something our ancestors learned to tolerate. It became a signal, a cue that said, there's ripe, calorie-dense fruit nearby. Primates that were drawn to that smell found food faster than the ones that ignored it. Over millions of years, that preference got written into our biology, including the genes that let our bodies process alcohol today. So the appetite for alcohol isn't a modern flaw or a moral failing bolted onto an otherwise clean species. It's a multi-million-year-old survival tool that's long since outlived the environment it was built for. Fast forward a very long time to about 13,000 years ago, in a cave called Rakafet, on Mount Carmel in modern-day Israel. This is the territory of the Natufians, a group of hunter-gatherers who were doing something unusual, living in semi-permanent settlements before agriculture even existed. When archaeologists excavated Rakafet Cave, they found stone mortars, shallow depressions carved into bedrock, that showed chemical residue consistent with fermented, beer-like beverages made from wild wheat or barley. That single discovery, published in 2018, pushed back the earliest known evidence of deliberately brewed alcohol thousands of years earlier than most historians expected, to a time before anyone had figured out how to farm. Which raises an uncomfortable question for the standard story of civilization. What if the drive to brew came before the drive to farm, not after? About 1,000 years later, and a few hundred miles north, in what's now southeastern Turkey, a group of hunter-gatherers built something that shouldn't have existed yet. Massive carved stone pillars, arranged in circles, decorated with animals and abstract symbols. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and it's widely considered the oldest known monumental architecture on Earth, built before pottery, before writing, before the wheel. Archaeologists working the site have found huge stone vats, some capable of holding over 100 liters of liquid, with residues suggesting they were used to ferment grain into a beer-like drink. Which means the people who raised the first great stone monuments in human history may have been fueling the work and the rituals around it with alcohol. Jump forward again to around 7000 BCE, along the Yellow River in China, at a site called Jiahu. An archaeochemist named Patrick McGovern, who has spent decades analyzing residue trapped in ancient pottery, tested jars found here and identified what's now considered the oldest known alcoholic recipe on record. A fermented mix of rice, honey, and fruit, brewed roughly 9,000 years ago. McGovern's broader body of work goes even further than that single discovery. He's argued somewhat provocatively that the desire to brew alcohol may have been one of the driving forces behind the invention of agriculture itself. That early humans didn't just start farming grain to make bread. They may have started farming it to make beer, and bread came along for the ride. By the time you reach ancient Egypt, alcohol isn't a ritual curiosity anymore. It's infrastructure. Excavations near the Giza Plateau, where the pyramids were built, uncovered the remains of a settlement that housed and fed the thousands of laborers who worked on the monuments. Their rations included large daily allotments of beer, not as a luxury, but as a basic part of payment and nutrition alongside bread. In other words, the most iconic structures in ancient history were, quite literally, built on beer. So trace it all the way back, and the line runs unbroken, from a primate on a forest floor to a cave on Mount Carmel, to the first great monuments humans ever built, to the pyramids themselves. We didn't discover alcohol at some late, sophisticated point in our history. We were shaped by it from millions of years before we were even human. The forgotten truth is that our oldest technology might not be fire or the wheel. It might be fermentation. Next time you raise a glass, you're not doing something new. You're doing something older than your own species.